demonstrate a couple of the portraits I've done, which are the black and whites. So the portrait of Paul the Gelder, who is a Navy SEAL who was attacked by a bull shark in Sydney Harbour about 10 years ago now. Paul had lost his arm and his hand and his right leg just above the knee, and as a double amputee, recovered. He is now a motivational speaker, but he has a great sense of strength and a great sense of purpose with what he does. He had an amazing tattoo put on his left arm in his recovery, and I wanted to make sure that I was true to the artist's work. So in that, I wanted to make sure that the detail in that tattoo was reproduced as it was on his arm. The concept, therefore, that I started with on this portrait was tone and not so much light, but mainly tone and the compositional angle of narrative. I chose a black background because I wanted his prosthetics to disappear into the background. The person that he is not the injury that he suffered, and I wanted that injury to disappear into his background, so that's part of the narrative. So the black prosthetic on his glove, and the black prosthetic of his leg now become part of his background, and the injury is part of his past. So the composition being tonal, therefore the value was the underlying concept in this particular piece. However, the black and white composition over here to my right is all about light, and that's a large portrait of Glenn A. Baker. He's a rock historian, and when I did his portrait, it was all about the light falling on his face, therefore enlivening the subject. You can see the strong drama on his face. It's got a sense of tone. It's not really the composition that I was worried about. It was just about catching the light to enliven the features. In both these portraits, of course, there's no color involved. So the concept differed. In this case, it was about the composition, getting the composition right. So there's the balance in the composition. In that particular portrait, the underlying concept was light. These two portraits, being a long way away, I'm just going to point out to them about what the underlying concept were in both these cases. The underlying concept in the portrait of Euron Hallis is colour. Clearly, with a very, very complicated background and a lot of detail in it, with all the memorabilia that he is a collector of, I wanted to include that into the portrait because it's part of the narrative. However, the concept being colour allows me to keep in mind that I want the subject, Euron Hallis, sitting on his coin-operated camel, to be front and centre, and for that to be what the concept of the portrait is. So the background has a lot of detail, but it's not colourful, and the tones of the background, the values of the background items in the whole composition are close together. By keeping the values close together and removing the colour out of such a complicated background, the background stays back, and the colour, injecting the colour into the subject, brings it forward. Even to the point where the camel comes more forward than, say, Euron's trousers, because the camel has a lot of colour and a lot of contrast, but not much detail. Therefore, just by the colour and the contrast, the camel's head comes forward. However, your eye, I direct the viewer's eye to Euron's face, because in Euron's face you have the colour, you have the detail, and you have the contrast. So the most colour, contrast and detail is in Euron's face, which means that the viewer's eye gets directed straight to his face. The second most colour and contrast is in the camel's face, so your eye goes down to the camel. And the third amount of detail, but not much colour or contrast, is in Euron's hand. So I'm directing the viewer's eye around this area here, and the background elements come into play only because there is detail in them, but there's no colour and there's no contrast. Portrait over here of Barry Watson, being a fireman. in this particular composition, it was actually very much about colour. So the underlying concept was colour, to the point where there's a lot of warm reds, cool reds, sharp contrast. I moved the composition in the background to make sure that the colour was put fully into the face. So by moving the background of the fire engine so that the shutter door, the roller shutter door of the fire engine was directly behind Barry's face, which was not the case in real life, it meant that the warmth of his face against the cool background colours made that come forward. So it's an example of using cool colours and warm colours and playing the cool colours to push back into the background, and therefore automatically making the warm colours of the face come forward. The colours on the fire engine, there's some areas of sharp reds, and there's some of more of a cadmium scarlet, and there are other areas on the fire engine which are more alizarin crimson. So the cooler reds will stay back, and the warmer reds will come forward. That's the example that you see there. But the high colour detail, high amount of colour, detail and contrast remains in Barry's face, and it then goes down, secondary, it goes down to less detail, but a lot of colour and in his hand, so it goes down to the bright cadmium yellow and the bright cadmium red area, and then it goes around again, back up to the detail on the fire engine, so I direct the viewer's eye from the face to the hand, back to the detail of the fire engine, which has less colour, it has a lot of detail, but not much contrast. And that's where colour comes into the concept. In this image, the concept is about light and also tone or contrast. This particular image, I work from my own images of wildlife as I travel around the world. This was an image I collected of a large African male elephant in Botswana. The concept behind it was light hitting one side of the face. The reason I was using the concept as light is because the narrative behind it. These animals are they're endangered, they're being poached and are highly sought after, so we're losing them. And hence the narrative reflected in the title, Disappearing Before Our Eyes, was what underpins this concept as well. Concept, light hitting one side of the face, therefore in doing so it is actually making the subject look like they're disappearing before our eyes, which is part of the narrative. By putting all the contrast, colour and detail just into this area, I'm directing the viewer's gaze to look there and only there. Our minds finish off what we can't see. In the shadow side there's a hint of an eye, but the tone of the eye is kept very, very much in the shadows. So these tones are all kept very, very close together, and they're deep greys and blacks here, whereas I've gone across here and I've built up the lights with white pastel and much lighter greys, culminating in strong contrast, colour and detail in this eye. So this is an example of how contrast and light has been the concept behind this piece.